Welcome back, everybody. So here we are with issue 5 again, and this is going to be the bonus um, video for issue 5. Now, the issue 5's got a lot of interesting things, and in order to not have it go too long, I kind of had to kind of go through a lot of it just to make sure that we didn't really drag it out too much. So, um, has a lot to do with Corellian Engineering Corporation and more specifically the YT series ships. So let's go ahead and get into this. So right here, two of the fastest and most famous smuggling vessels in history were based on modified CEC freighters. Han Solo's Millennium Falcon and Dash Rendar's Outrider, which started life as a stock YT-13 and a stock YT-2400 models. Um, like all the YT series, they featured CEC's characteristic saucer-shaped hull, which both Solo and Rendar reinforced with additional armor. So, Dash Rendar, he's from uh, uh, he's from a book series, if I recall. Um, he's not no longer canon, um, and so yeah, so he doesn't really count into this, but throwing a little added kind of niceties to those that followed any of the expanded universe stuff are now considered legends. Um, Likewise, we're going to talk a little bit about the Ebon Hawk and even the Wild Cardi, which was Talon Cardi's or Talon Card. I don't know. I always said it Talon Cardi, but um, anyway, it talks a little bit about that. And we'll kind of go into those a little bit. But so the YT 1300 light freighter, the first YT series ship, was developed by CEC's engineers with somewhat surprisingly input from Naro Sinar, boss of a rival company, the Santh and Sinar Technologies. The YT-1000 became one of the most popular space transports of its era, and CEC revolutionized interstellar shipping with its innovative use of modular design. Large sections of the ship could be mass produced and reconfigured as needed without extensive retooling. Um, this saving this saving allowed the YT series to be marketed at extremely competitive prices, while owners could easily customize the ships to suit their needs. Building on the success of the YT-1000, YT-1200, and YT-1210, the YT-1300 model exemplified this concept with a circular main corridor around a central core of its saucer-shaped hull. All right. One of the things I did not know was the CR-90 Corvette was made by the Corellian Engineering Corporation. So if you don't recognize this, this is the same ship, the Tantive V, that Leia was in. So the CR-90 enhanced CEC's reputation as something of a rogue manufacturer. With so many in operation throughout the galaxy, it was ideal for clandestine work. The Rebel Alliance used a number of these corvettes, most famously Princess Leia Organa's Tantive V, or Tantive IV, I guess. It could be Tantive 4, but I always heard everybody say IV. For covert missions, as it was almost impossible for the Empire to determine which ships were legitimate. So there's a section here I really want to go through, and I found it very interesting. We'll kind of move on. I don't want to go through all this. This whole issue was very interesting, but early in its history, CEC became manufacturer of choice for smugglers who appreciated the way that its modular freighters could be upgraded for combat with legal or illegal aftermarket additions. Over the years, CEC quietly went out of its way to court such customers, initially with the YG series of light freighter, manufactured centuries before the Battle of Yavin. In later years, CEC's new YT class of freighters became particularly popular in smuggling circles. Disgusted by the high tariffs the empire placed on galactic trade, CEC was quite willing to help those individuals who wished to circumvent these taxes. The most famous smuggling ship, the Millennium Falcon, was originally a stock 13, YT-1300 freighter in which its many owners had added souped-up engines and military-grade weapons. By the time the later YT-2400 began coming off the production lines, CEC was beginning to target the smuggling market more openly. The basic model came ready fitted with armor plating for the occasional skirmish, and there was plenty of room in the cargo hold for a major upgrade of its weapons and engines. Indeed, the CEC management was so aware of the use to which these ships were going to be put that their description of it as a stock cargo hauler became something of a running joke in the industry. So, yeah, it's rather interesting that, you know, how that all came to be. So, um, here we'll talk about the forerunner of the Falcon, the Ebon Hawk. So, anybody that played the Knights of the Old Republic would know about the Ebon Hawk. Uh, so, and then if you know anything at all about the Legends, the Legends mostly kicked off with the Thrawn trilogy, and this would be the wild card, and so that would be an interesting ship for people to know about. So. 4,000 years ago, the dynamic class light freighter built by the founding shipwright company Core Galaxy Systems operated around the galaxy. Their venerable design was so classically right that its echoes inspired the layout of CEC's light freighters eons later. One descendant was the Millennium Falcon, whose career had some uncanny parallels with the famed Ebon Hawk, which took part in the Mandalorian Wars in uh, 3976 through 3960 BBY, which stands for Before Battle of Yavin. Roughly semicircular with the four projections, the dynamic class was designed to accommodate paying cargo, a small crew, and other equipment, such as swoop bike. In the case of the Ebon Hawk, the cargo was generally contraband, as her owners, who included the criminal exchange organization, made a living smuggling spice and illicit goods. Heavily customized and retrofitted with the Class 1 hyperdrive, the Hawk was rumored to be the fastest ship in the galaxy. Uh, let me see if it talks about anything else here that's um, important about that. Nope, not really. So it talks a little bit here about Corellia. Corellia came into existence in 1977 when Lucasfilm set out to provide Han Solo with a background story. George Lucas had originally called Han's homeworld Krell. This was described as a forbidding gaseous world with cities floating in the clouds, an idea later used as the basis for Bespin in Episode 5. In the canceled novel Alien Exodus, Corellia was to have been named after Antonia Corelli, pilot of the 25th century spacecraft from Earth. When this ship is displaced by a wormhole to another galaxy in time, its passengers and crew became the first humans in the Star Wars universe. So, yeah, that was apparently part of a book that ended up getting scrapped. So here's some very interesting parts for the freighter, something I really wanted to share. We kind of briefly talked about it, I think, when we did the normal issue here. So these are the official variants, and I don't know where they got this information, if this was something that um, they got from Lucasfilm or was in one of the, um, the, like, say, because I know Lucasfilm would put out books on ships and all that kind of stuff, and maybe they had something like this in there. I'm guessing they didn't just come up with this on their own, but um, it was. I know I pointed this out. This was before Solo came out, obviously, because these were all published and printed. before um, before the Force Awakens was came out, or right around the same time as the Force Awakens. So it was long before Solo had come out. So like this configuration here, which is what we saw in Solo, that that is not um, that was not uh, thought up of just in Solo. So it's interesting that they put that back on there. That maybe they saw this and said, "Hey, let's make that what the Millennium Falcon looks like originally." You know, so you can see basically there's two different or three different engine housings. So you have the armored engine, you have the wide bar engine, which there's a spot in here which talks about it. It talks about um, this the YT 1300 was the first one that had this wide bar engine, and then it had the conical engines was the normal fashion for the YT series stuff. So you could get these three different engines. You could have the cockpit could be on either side of the saucer, or it could be right down in the middle in between the mandibles. And then you have the enclosed cockpit, which is also the uh, could be used as the well they use it in Solo was the well, what do you call it, escape pod. Sorry. Yeah, so you have the escape pod, and then of course, obviously the offset cockpits as well. So yeah, it's interesting that this is known as an enclosed cockpit, but that goes in the middle, but you still have the offset cockpit there. So that's why I feel like that was known as an escape pod prior to that. So, but these are all the common kind of configurations, and basically, you just with all these different parts, you give all these different possibilities. And so then they have an elevated turret as well here in comparison to just the normal turret, right? So yeah, um, this is, like I said, I found that rather interesting that this was all part of this. One of the things going through these magazines that I find that's very important to point out is the majority of this stuff, um, not the majority, but some of this stuff, like I said, is talking about the Ebb and Hawk and the wild card. Some of this stuff basically went away when Disney um, bought Lucasfilm because Disney decided that they were doing away with all of the Legends stuff as far as canon. It wasn't officially gone. Basically, what they decided was it wasn't part of canon until they brought it back into canon. So most recently with the Rise of Skywalker, um, they talked about Darth Revan. So they made Darth Revan from the Knights of the Old Republic. Um, they made him canon again. So like they haven't really told that whole story, but he himself is canon. So you'd like to think that a good portion of that story would be canon as well. I'm sure they'll manipulate it in some way, but I know that makes a lot of fans of KOTOR, as we would call it, um, makes a lot of fans happy to be able to bring that in. So this here talks about the smuggling compartments, and so it's basically you know, pretty much if you've seen A New Hope, then what this is saying. Basically, it's the smuggling compartments, and that although Han had never really intended to use it himself, it was found to be large enough to be able to fit in there. So I found that pretty interesting. Here, talking about the dimensions, and this is talking about the real life dimensions in comparison to the drawings. So um, this is more of the design, just to, you know, from what they had to, what they built in the models and that kind of stuff. So limitations faced by the team, which made the original Star Wars trilogy, meant that they sometimes had to use creative license to depict the ship, and this led to a confusion over the size of the Falcon. The studio interior sets that were built for Episode 4 and 5 simply could not fit comfortably inside the exterior dimensions of the ship defined by ILM models, let alone the full-size Falcon exterior built for The Empire Strikes Back, which was only about 75 to 80% of the size of a scaled-up version of the ILM miniatures. For years after the movies were made, the Falcon's official length was said to be 87.6 feet, which was 26.7 meters, and this dimension was used in one of the earliest attempts to map the Falcon's interior in the Star Wars source book by West End Games in 1987. Based on set drawings and a certain amount of imaginative interpretation, the design became the blueprint of for most YT-1300 freighters for years. In time, it became clear that these plans did not hold up to scrutiny, and when a new, more detailed blueprint came to be drawn up, then possibilities became obvious. Illustrators Chris Reif and Chris Trevis used a 1976 scale illustration by visual effects art director Joe Johnston as a foundation and compared it with the dimensions of X-wing and Y-wing fighters to get a length measurement of about 110 feet, which is 33.5 meters. When they drew the plans up in more detail, the exact length came out to be 113 feet, but this was adjusted to 114 feet to stop it appearing to be a coded reference to the movie THX 1138. For those of you that don't know about THX 1138, that was like one of Lucas's very first films. I think he did it in film school or something like that. It was a sci-fi film and all that kind of stuff. And for the longest time, he would put the number 1138 in all of his movies. Um, so yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing that it was, obviously it was just happenstance that it was 1138 or 113 feet point 8 inches, or 113.8 feet, sorry. Um, so it's just happenstance that that's what it came out to, because obviously Lucas didn't design it. He just basically approved it and all that kind of stuff. But um, yeah, that's pretty funny. A variety of other dimensions have been used, and the most recently accepted length is now 34.37 meters, which is slightly smaller than the 114 feet, but not by much. Probably closer to the 113.8 feet. To help to explain the confusion, the story went around that CEC had made a mistake in the official declaration of the ship's specifications, understanding its length, understating its length. Various explanations were offered, including a straightforward clerical error. Other theories were that the length had been quoted without allowing for the forward mandibles, or that it was a deliberate ploy to confuse CEC competition. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Ever since the movies generated spin-off publications above, there have been attempts to reconcile the difference between the ship's dimensions. So, yeah, there you go. That's kind of interesting. So, the planet this time is Coruscant. Now, one of the interesting things is Coruscant is 10,000 light years from the core, but it's very important to note here that, let me slide this over a little bit. It's very important to note here that almost as soon as interstellar travel became possible, Coruscant's unique position at hyperspace coordinates 0, 0, 0, 000 quickly assured it became the most important planet in the galaxy. While Coruscant is some 10,000 light years from the true center of the galaxy, the difficulty of traveling through the deep core means that almost all important hyperspace lanes had to skirt this dangerous region, and a remarkable number of these uh, lanes would intersect Coruscant. So that's why it's 10,000 light years from the core, but it's the center part in reality. So Senate traffic. So the Galactic Senate is located at the center of the Senate district on Coruscant. was the administrative heart of the Old Republic, attracting visitors from all over the galaxy several years before the Clone Wars. The Appropriations Committee voted to commission the new Senate Executive Building, also known as the Senate Office Building, Executive Annex Dome, or Senate Annex. This was a large domed building that housed the administration and also functioning as a spaceport, with several tiered levels of docking bays and hangars. The executive building became the official residence and principal workspace of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, who also resided in the executive building for a time as Emperor of the Galaxy before relocating to the much larger Imperial Palace, which had its own hangar bays and traffic control. So I know there's a lot of people questioning whether this is actually the Millennium Falcon or not. It could just be another YT-1300 that had the same configuration as the Falcon. Here it says shortly after the Second Battle of Coruscant, before she fell into the hands of Han Solo, the Millennium Falcon was seen landing in the Republic Executive Building docking bay. So here they claim that that was the Millennium Falcon, but we know that um, this would have been before Lando had her, right? Because he had her nice and clean. She was all white, had blue, had the central part for the escape pod, and all that kind of stuff. So um, I don't know if these guys took license um, to say that, or if there's some other source book from Lucasfilms that actually says that yes, that was the Millennium Falcon. Um, yeah, if it, like I said, if it was, uh, there's been a lot of evidence saying that many people have owned the Falcon long before uh, Han did, and which means many other people owned it before Lando did because Han got it from Lando. So it's possible that Lando made a bunch of upgrades. I mean, it talks about every owner making upgrades. So it's possible Lando made upgrades because he likes a lot of flashy stuff, so he made it more into a space yacht and that kind of stuff. So that could be the Millennium Falcon. I'd be curious to know where they got that information. So looks like Coruscant is roughly the size of Earth at 12,240 kilometers. And Earth was, let's see if I can find that again, 12,742. So Earth is still a little bit bigger. A lot of things, I don't know if it says it in here. I didn't really read through all of it. But a lot of places, especially in the old legend stuff, they would refer to Coruscant as the city planet because the entire planet is covered in, city. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Uh, let's see if we can get this out of the glare. Move this over here to the side, uh, in case you guys want to read it. The name Coruscant was first used in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Before that, George Lucas had mentioned the Imperial capital planet in early drafts of Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, but had called it Had Abaddon. Although the planet did not appear in the original movie, scenes were added in the 1997 special edition of Return of the Jedi, which showed the population of the galactic capital celebrating the death of the Emperor. Fans had to wait for a further 2 years in the release of The Phantom Menace to learn that the planet was called Coruscant, although the name had already been used by Timothy Zahn in the 1991 novel Heir to the Empire. So that's the Thrawn series that I talked about, Heir to the Empire series. Since then, the planet has been a major location in episodes 2 and 3, as well as the Clone Wars series. So, yeah, because of the fact that Lucas never put out the actual name and named the planet himself, um, you know, it came out in Legends, and so many people knew it as Coruscant that I think that's why Lucas just went ahead and stuck with it. He didn't want to change it up. A side note to that is, um, apparently, uh, the, in a lot of the Legends books, the Sith planet, there was a Sith planet known as Korriban, and Lucas decided he didn't really like that name, so he changed it to Moraban. So yeah, so that's kind of interesting as well. He still kind of kept the same kind of makeup of it, but he changed it to Moraban. Now, granted, I don't know. I'm trying to remember if that was ever in any of the um, like the Clone War series or anything like that, because that's the only thing that would make it officially canon. Um, just if it wasn't in something official that Lucas had printed as far as one of the source books, um, or it wasn't in one of the movies or like the Clone Wars series, it doesn't get counted as um, canon until Disney decides to put it in there. That's been their policy from day one. So it talks about the air taxis. I don't think we really need to get into that too much. Um, we have a little bit here. This is talking about the movie lighting effects. So, introduction of the high intensity LEDs has transformed modern lighting, but this technology was not available at the time the original trilogy was made. The earliest LEDs appeared in 1962, but only emitted low intensity infrared light. They were often used as indicator lamps for electronic devices and uh, as seven segment numeric display. So like a display for your clocks and that kind of stuff, right? The first visible LEDs were introduced in the 1980s and were also low intensity and limited to red. Filming required bright lights, so the Star Wars prop model makers were forced to use the technology of the time. Um, Neon, tungsten, and halogen bulbs for the high intensity glow of the engines of the Rebel blockade runner and the Falcon. This meant using halogen lights with aluminum shields to protect the plastic parts of the model from the high temperatures. It was even more complicated to simulate the thousands of lights visible on the mile-long Star Destroyers. These were also generated by a halogen source, used an aluminum heat shield, and equipped with a cooling system powered by compressed air from the central point. Bundles of fiber optic cables carried spots of light to the holes on the outer surface of the hull. On one occasion, when a camera crew forgot to turn off the cooling system, the heat melted the fiber optics, which could fortunately be repaired by LM modeler Paul Houston. So there's a video I saw on YouTube that talks about this, and it's like an hour long, and if I can find that video again, I'll put it in the description, a link to that in the description, and it's all about the special, doing a lot of the special effects and stuff, and that's how, interesting enough, that's how they would talk about how big a ship was, the way they would describe the size of the ship, talking about the Star Destroyers and all that kind of stuff. Um, like the Super Star Destroyers, when they made those were actually basically the same size as the regular Star Destroyers, but they would, the size was determined by the number of lights that it had. So because it had so many more lights, that was how they were able to kind of, you know, figure out how many lights it or the size of it or whatever. So they explain it obviously much better than I just did, but I found it interesting that that's kind of they talk about the halogen light with the air cooling and all that kind of stuff. So, um, all right. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is the end of issue 6. And again, or excuse me, end of issue 5. And again, in issue 6, we're going to be maybe not completely finishing up the cockpit, but we're going to be coming very, very close to having the cockpit completed. And then we'll be moving on to what I'm guessing is going to be the interior uh, cargo area where they do all they play the Jarek, and Luke does his lightsaber training and all that kind of stuff. We'll be moving to there. I know this is part of the seat for that, so um, that'll be coming up in future issues very soon. So with that, I'm going to say later. Bye, everybody.